Blood dripped from the female officer's tangled hair onto the wet asphalt. Cole Mitchell pressed a cloth against the wound on her forehead, his construction worker hands trembling but precise in every movement. "Breathe steady," he whispered, checking the weak pulse on her wrist. The police badge gleamed under the streetlight, but something was wrong. No patrol car, no radio calls for backup, just her and the overturned vehicle. The female officer's eyes suddenly opened wide, staring straight at him with a look of terror. Not from the pain, but from the fact that he had found her. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered through bleeding lips. Cole looked down at his hands holding something that had fallen from her jacket pocket. 12 hours earlier, Cole Mitchell had been wrestling with a decision that felt impossible for any parent to make. The kitchen table in his cramped apartment was covered with bills that had turned from white to yellow to pink, each color representing another level of urgency that his paycheck from Riverside Construction couldn't match. The rent notice was dated 3 days ago, and his 7-year-old son Jamie would be home from school in 2 hours, expecting dinner and homework help and the kind of normalcy that Cole was struggling to provide. He picked up the photograph from his wallet, creased and faded from years of handling. Lisa smiled back at him from their wedding day, her hand resting on her barely visible pregnancy bump. She had died when Jamie was 6 months old, leaving Cole to navigate single parenthood with no manual and no safety net. The medical bills from her cancer treatment had consumed their savings, and the life insurance payout had barely covered the funeral costs. Cole had trained as a paramedic before Lisa got sick, working ambulance runs and emergency room rotations with the kind of dedication that came from genuinely wanting to save lives. But when she was diagnosed, he had switched to construction work for the steadier schedule and better pay, telling himself it was temporary. That was 6.5 years ago, and the temporary solution had become a permanent trap. His medical certification had lapsed, his skills had grown rusty, and the bills kept coming with mechanical regularity. The sound of Jamie's key in the lock pulled Cole back to the present moment. His son burst through the door with the energy that only children possess after spending 8 hours in classroom chairs, his backpack hitting the floor with a thud that suggested it contained everything he owned. "Dad! Mrs. Peterson says we're doing a career day next week, and I want to tell everyone about how you save people." Jamie's enthusiasm was infectious, his face bright with the kind of pride that made Cole's chest tight with conflicting emotions. "Buddy, I don't save people anymore. I build things now, remember? We talked about this." Cole tried to keep his voice level, but the disappointment in his own words was hard to mask. Jamie's expression grew serious in the way that children's faces do when they're processing information that doesn't quite make sense to them. "But you still know how to save people, right? Like if someone got hurt?" "I guess so. But that's not my job anymore." Cole ruffled his son's hair and steered him toward the kitchen. "How about we focus on your homework while I figure out dinner?" The evening routine was familiar and comforting in its predictability. Jamie worked on math problems while Cole heated up leftover spaghetti, both of them stealing glances at the small television that provided background noise and distraction from the weight of unpaid bills and uncertain futures. After dinner, they played a board game that Jamie had received for Christmas, the pieces slightly worn but still functional, like most of their possessions. It was during their game that the accident happened, just 6 blocks away from their apartment building. Cole heard the sirens first, then the helicopter that meant someone was in serious trouble. Jamie pressed his face to the window, watching the emergency lights paint the night sky in alternating patterns of red and blue. "Someone needs help," Jamie observed with the matter-of-fact tone he used for stating obvious truths. Cole felt the familiar pull, the instinct that had driven him through years of medical training and emergency responses. But he stayed in his chair, focusing on the board game and telling himself that other people were handling whatever crisis was unfolding in the darkness beyond their window. It was 20 minutes later, when Cole was walking to the corner store for milk, that he found himself at the accident scene. The overturned sedan was wrapped around a telephone pole, steam rising from the engine, and glass scattered across the intersection like dangerous confetti. The ambulance hadn't arrived yet, and the few bystanders who had gathered were maintaining the careful distance that people keep when confronted with tragedy they don't know how to handle. That's when he saw her, partially ejected from the driver's side, her police uniform torn and bloodied, but unmistakably official. Her badge caught the streetlight, and Cole could see that she was breathing, but barely. The paramedic in him took over before the construction worker could object, and he found himself kneeling beside her, checking for signs of life and assessing injuries with the kind of automatic expert that years of training had burned into his muscle memory. She was in bad shape, but not beyond help if someone acted quickly. Cole looked around for other first responders, for anyone with medical training, for someone whose job it was to handle this situation. But the street was empty, except for frightened civilians and distant sirens that might arrive too late. He made the decision that would change everything. Working carefully, Cole stabilized her neck and checked her airway, his hands moving with the precision of someone who had done this hundreds of times before. She had a head injury that was bleeding freely but didn't appear to have skull fractures, and her breathing was shallow but regular. Her pulse was weak but steady, and she wasn't showing signs of internal bleeding that would require immediate surgical intervention. "Stay with me," he whispered, applying pressure to the head wound and checking her pupil response. "Help is coming." That's when her eyes opened, focusing on him with startling clarity for someone who had just been in a serious accident. Instead of relief or gratitude, her expression showed something that looked like fear. Not fear of dying, but fear of being found. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered through lips that were swollen and bleeding. Cole felt something crinkle in his hand as he shifted position, and he looked down to see a plastic evidence bag that had fallen from her jacket pocket. Through the clear material, he could see bundles of cash, more money than he had seen in months. The bag was labeled with case numbers and official stamps, but it was in her personal possession, rather than secured in an evidence locker where it belonged. The pieces didn't fit together in any way that made sense. A police officer alone at night, carrying evidence money in her personal vehicle, crashed in a way that looked more like she had been running from something than responding to a call. The absence of backup, the terror in her eyes when she saw him, the way she had told him he shouldn't be there. "Who are you?" Cole asked quietly, still maintaining pressure on her wounds but no longer certain that he was helping the right person. "Someone who made a mistake," she replied, her voice gaining strength despite her injuries. "Someone who thought she could fix things and only made them worse." The ambulance arrived then, along with patrol cars and the kind of official chaos that accompanies serious accidents in urban areas. Cole stepped back, letting the paramedics take over, but he kept the evidence bag tucked in his jacket pocket. Something told him that revealing it at the scene would create complications that neither he nor the injured officer was prepared to handle. During the ride to the hospital, Cole found himself in the strange position of being both a good Samaritan who had potentially saved a life and an unwitting accomplice to something that he didn't understand. The evidence bag felt like it was burning a hole in his pocket, and the officer's words kept echoing in his mind. Someone who made a mistake. Someone who thought she could fix things. At Memorial Hospital, Cole gave his statement to the responding officers, describing how he had found her and administered first aid until the ambulance arrived. He left out the part about the evidence bag, telling himself that he needed to understand the situation better before making decisions that might ruin an innocent person's life. The investigating officers seemed satisfied with his account, praising his quick thinking and medical knowledge. It was only when he was walking home, past midnight, that Cole realized he didn't even know the injured officer's name. The hospital staff had been focused on her medical condition, and the police report had been handled by different officers who treated him as a witness rather than a participant. He was carrying evidence from a crime scene involving a person whose identity was completely unknown to him. Back at his apartment, Jamie was asleep in bed, oblivious to the events that had unfolded while he was dreaming. Cole sat at the kitchen table, staring at the evidence bag and trying to make sense of what he had stumbled into. The money was real, substantial enough to solve his immediate financial problems and give him breathing room to figure out longer-term solutions. But taking it would make him a thief, and keeping quiet about it made him an accessory to whatever crime had put it in the officer's possession. He thought about Lisa, about the choices she would have made in this situation. She had always been the moral compass in their relationship, the one who insisted on doing the right thing even when it was difficult or expensive. But she had also been a practical person who understood that sometimes survival required compromises that looked different in the harsh light of reality than they did in the comfortable glow of abstract principles. The next morning, Cole called in sick to work and drove to Memorial Hospital. He told Jamie he had errands to run, which was technically true, though it didn't capture the complexity of what he was actually doing. The injured officer was in stable condition, awake and alert according to the nurse, though she wasn't receiving visitors except for immediate family. Cole waited in the parking lot, watching the entrance and trying to figure out what he was going to say when he saw her again. He had brought the evidence bag with him, wrapped in a plain brown envelope, but he still wasn't certain what he planned to do with it. Return it quietly and walk away? Demand explanations? Turn it over to the authorities and let them sort out the consequences? The decision was made for him when she appeared at the hospital entrance, moving slowly but under her own power. She was wearing civilian clothes and carrying a small bag, clearly being discharged earlier than expected. Cole approached her carefully, aware that she might bolt if she felt threatened or trapped. "How are you feeling?" he asked, falling into step beside her as she headed toward the bus stop. She looked at him with eyes that were clearer than they had been the night before, but still haunted by whatever had put her in that crashed car. "Like someone who owes you a debt I can't repay." "You don't owe me anything. But I think we need to talk." Cole pulled the envelope from his jacket pocket. "About this. About—" Her face went pale when she recognized what he was holding. "Where did you find that?" "It fell out of your pocket when I was trying to help you. Along with some questions that I can't seem to stop asking myself." They found a quiet coffee shop 6 blocks from the hospital, sitting in a corner booth where their conversation wouldn't be overheard by other customers. She introduced herself as Riley Harper, detective with the Cedar Falls Police Department, though she said it in a way that suggested the title might not be accurate much longer. "I've been working undercover for 8 months," she explained, stirring her coffee with hands that shook slightly. "Trying to build a case against officers in my own department who've been skimming from drug busts and evidence lockers. The money you found was supposed to be bait, proof of their activities that I could take to internal affairs." Cole studied her face, looking for signs that she was lying or manipulating him, but her exhaustion seemed genuine, and her fear was too specific to be fabricated. "What went wrong?" "They figured out what I was doing. Yesterday afternoon, I got word that they were planning to eliminate the problem, starting with me. I grabbed what evidence I could and tried to run." She laughed bitterly. "Obviously didn't get very far." Why not go to Internal Affairs? Or the FBI? There have to be official channels for this kind of thing. Riley shook her head. The corruption goes higher than you think. I'm not sure who I can trust in the department, and bringing in outside agencies would take weeks that I don't have. These aren't people who leave loose ends. Cole felt the weight of the situation settling on his shoulders. This wasn't just about returning lost property or doing the right thing in some abstract sense. This was about a woman who had risked her life to expose corruption and was now being hunted by the very people she had sworn to serve alongside. "What do you need from me?" he asked, though part of him already knew the answer and dreaded it. "Time. A place to lay low while I figure out how to make this evidence count. And maybe—" She hesitated, then continued. "Someone they don't know about, who could help me get the information to people who can act on it." Cole thought about Jamie, about the rent that was due in 4 days, about the life they had built together in their small apartment, with its familiar routines and carefully maintained normalcy. Getting involved with Riley Harper would jeopardize all of that, potentially putting his son in danger and destroying the stability that had taken years to establish. But he also thought about the oath he had taken as a paramedic, about the commitment to help people who were in crisis regardless of the personal cost. Riley was in crisis, and she was asking for help from someone who had already proven that he was willing to act when action was needed. "My son doesn't know about any of this," Cole said finally. "And he's not going to. Whatever we do, we keep him completely out of it." Relief flooded Riley's face. "I understand. I would never put a child at risk. What exactly are we talking about? What kind of help do you need?" Riley opened her bag and pulled out a flash drive, setting it on the table between them. "Everything is on here. Financial records, recorded conversations, photographic evidence of money being stolen and redistributed. Enough to bring down at least 6 officers and probably more. Why haven't you already turned it in?" "Because the person I was planning to give it to is one of the names on the list. And because I need more than just evidence. I need someone who can testify about how the money moves, where it goes, who benefits. Someone who's been part of the system but isn't compromised by it." Cole stared at the flash drive, understanding that picking it up would mean crossing a line that he couldn't uncross. But before he could respond, his phone buzzed. A text from a number he didn't recognize. "Stop looking into things that don't concern you." Last warning. Riley saw his expression change. "They're watching us. We need to move fast." "How long do we have?" 48 hours, maybe less. They're already cleaning house, destroying records, intimidating witnesses. After that, anyone helping me becomes a target too." Riley's hands trembled as she checked her phone. "I've been getting calls from numbers I don't recognize. They know I'm alive." The coffee shop around them buzzed with normal activity, people starting their days with caffeine and conversation, unaware that a life-changing decision was being made at a corner table. Cole thought about his morning routine with Jamie, about homework help and board games, and the kind of ordinary happiness that required extraordinary sacrifices to maintain. But he also thought about the officer who had tried to do the right thing and had nearly died for it, who was now asking for help from a stranger because she had nowhere else to turn. The choice wasn't really between safety and danger, or between his family and hers. The choice was between the person he had become out of necessity and the person he had always intended to be. Cole picked up the flash drive. "Tell me what you need me to do." Riley leaned forward, lowering her voice. "First, you need to understand how evidence works. This drive can't just be handed over to anyone. Chain of custody matters. Who had it? When? Where it came from. One mistake and the entire case gets thrown out. She pulled a notebook from her bag. I'm going to walk you through exactly what to say, how to present it. This has to be perfect. As she spoke, Cole noticed a dark sedan that had been parked across the street when they arrived was still there, its occupants obscured by tinted windows. When he mentioned it, Riley's face went white. We need to leave. Now! The plan Riley outlined was simple in concept but terrifying in execution. She needed to get the evidence to a federal prosecutor who specialized in police corruption cases, someone outside the local law enforcement network who could act on the information without alerting the officers under investigation. But she couldn't make contact herself without revealing that she had survived and potentially triggering the elimination of witnesses before the case could be developed. Cole would serve as an intermediary, claiming that he had found the flash drive at the accident scene and felt obligated to turn it in through proper channels. His background as a former paramedic gave him credibility, and his current status as a construction worker made him an unlikely candidate for any kind of sophisticated conspiracy. The federal prosecutor would investigate the claims, and if the evidence was as damning as Riley believed, arrests would follow quickly. What about you? Cole asked. Where will you be while this is happening? Gone. Out of state, new identity, starting over somewhere that these people can't reach me. She paused. I'm sorry to put this on you, but I don't have any other options. Cole understood that helping Riley meant accepting responsibility for the consequences, both positive and negative. If the plan worked, corrupt officers would face justice and the community would be safer. If it failed, he could face charges as an accessory, and Jamie could lose the only parent he had left. That evening, Cole tried to maintain his normal routine with his son, helping with homework and preparing dinner as if nothing had changed. But Jamie was perceptive in the way that children often are, and he noticed the tension that Cole was trying to hide. Are you worried about something, Dad? Jamie asked over their meal of mac and cheese from a box. Just work stuff, buddy. Nothing you need to worry about. Is it about money? I heard you talking on the phone about bills. Cole felt his chest tighten. He had tried so hard to shield Jamie from their financial struggles, but children absorbed more than adults realized. We're going to be okay. I promise. I know. You always figure things out. Jamie's confidence was absolute, based on 6 years of evidence that his father could handle whatever challenges arose. You're good at helping people. Later that night, after Jamie was asleep, Cole's phone rang. The number was blocked. Mr. Mitchell? The voice was calm, professional. I think you have something that doesn't belong to you. Cole's blood ran cold. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do. And I think you're going to do the smart thing and return it, for your son's sake. The line went dead. Cole checked all the locks, closed all the blinds, and spent the rest of the night watching shadows move across their windows. The next morning, Cole made the call to the federal prosecutor's office, using the story that Riley had suggested. He had found what appeared to be evidence of police corruption at an accident scene, and he felt obligated to report it through proper channels. The prosecutor, a woman named Janet Morrison, agreed to meet with him that afternoon. Before leaving for the meeting, Cole walked Jamie to school, scanning the street for the sedan from the night before. He didn't see it, but the feeling of being watched never left him. At the school entrance, Jamie suddenly stopped. Dad, there was a man taking pictures of our building this morning. Is that normal? Cole's stomach dropped. What kind of man? Just a man with a camera. He was in a car. Jamie shrugged with the casual acceptance that children have for adult mysteries. I thought maybe he was a realtor or something. Maybe, buddy. Just, if you see anyone like that again, you tell me right away, okay? Walking back from the school, Cole spotted the dark sedan 2 blocks behind him. When he turned a corner, it turned. When he stopped at a crosswalk, it stopped too. They weren't even trying to be subtle anymore. The federal building in downtown Cedar Falls was intimidating in its official grandeur, all marble floors and security checkpoints that reminded Cole of the gravity of what he was doing. Morrison turned out to be a sharp-featured woman in her 50s, with the kind of no-nonsense demeanor that suggested she had seen every possible variation of crime and corruption in her career. "This is highly unusual," she said after reviewing the contents of the flash drive. "Evidence of this specificity and scope doesn't typically just fall into civilian hands." Cole stuck to his story, describing his medical response to the accident and his discovery of the drive in the wreckage. Morrison asked probing questions about his background and motivations, clearly trying to determine whether he was a legitimate whistleblower or part of some more complicated scheme. "If this information is accurate," Morrison said finally, "we're looking at a conspiracy that involves significant money and potentially dangerous people. Are you prepared for the possibility that your cooperation might put you at risk?" "I'm prepared to do what's right," Cole replied, though his certainty felt less solid than his words suggested. Morrison spent the next 2 hours going through the evidence in detail, occasionally asking Cole questions about specific items or locations mentioned in the files. It became clear that the corruption was extensive and systematic, involving not just individual officers, but coordinated efforts to steal and launder money from drug investigations. "We'll need you to testify when this goes to trial," Morrison said as their meeting concluded. "Your discovery of the evidence and your decision to report it will be crucial to establishing how the information came to light." Cole agreed, understanding that his commitment was now official and irreversible. As he left the federal building, he noticed the same dark sedan parked across the street. When he took out his phone to call Riley, a text message was already waiting. "Building surrounded. They know. Get Jamie and run." But when Cole reached the school, Jamie was already gone. The secretary explained that his uncle had picked him up early for a dental appointment. Jamie didn't have an uncle. Riley had given him a phone number to call when his meeting with the prosecutor was complete, but when he tried to dial it, the call went straight to a disconnected message. He tried again from a different phone with the same result. Either she had changed numbers, or something had happened to her. Racing through traffic to get back to his apartment, Cole's phone rang constantly, blocked numbers that he didn't answer. When he finally reached his building, he noticed that the security cameras at the entrance had been spray-painted over with black paint. Someone had been very busy while he was gone. Inside his apartment, everything looked normal at first glance. But when Cole looked closer, he could see that someone had been through his belongings carefully. Drawers were closed but not quite aligned properly. Books were shelved but in slightly different orders. His computer had been moved just enough that the dust patterns on the desk were disturbed. They had been searching for something, and they had been professional about it. No obvious damage, no clear signs of break-in, but every surface had been examined and every hiding place had been explored. Cole's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "We have Jamie. USB drive for the boy. 1 hour. Cedar Falls Park, south entrance. Come alone." Cole thought about Jamie, about explaining to his son why they might need to move or change their names or live with the kind of fear that came from testifying against dangerous people. But he also thought about Riley, who had been willing to risk everything to expose corruption, and about the community that deserved better from the people sworn to protect them. "What will you do now?" he asked. "Start over. Again. It's not the first time, and it probably won't be the last. Will I ever see you again? Probably not. But you'll know that you did something that mattered, something that your son can be proud of when he's old enough to understand." They said goodbye then, two strangers whose lives had intersected in a moment of crisis and who would probably never cross paths again. Cole hung up the phone and walked home, trying to figure out how to explain to Jamie that their lives were about to change in ways that a 7-year-old couldn't possibly comprehend. The arrests began 6 days later, announced on the evening news with the kind of dramatic coverage reserved for major corruption scandals. 6 officers were taken into custody, charged with theft, money laundering, and conspiracy. The evidence was described as overwhelming, discovered by a citizen who had chosen to do the right thing despite personal risk. Cole and Jamie watched the news together, Jamie asking questions about why police officers would steal money and whether this meant all police officers were bad people. Cole tried to explain the difference between individuals who made bad choices and institutions that were generally trustworthy, though the concepts felt more complex than a 7-year-old should have to process. "Are we safe?" Jamie asked when the news moved on to other stories. "Yes, buddy. We're safe." Cole hoped it was true. The trial began 3 months later, and Cole spent 2 days on the witness stand, describing his discovery of the evidence and his decision to report it. The defense attorneys tried to suggest that he had fabricated the story or been part of a conspiracy to frame innocent officers, but the physical evidence supported his account. Morrison had been right about the scope of the corruption. By the time all the investigations were complete, 14 officers had been arrested, along with several civilian accomplices who had helped launder the stolen money. The total amount involved exceeded $2 million, stolen from drug busts and evidence lockers over a period of 4 years. Riley never testified. She had vanished completely after their last phone conversation, leaving no trace of her new identity or location. Cole sometimes wondered if she had managed to build a new life somewhere safe, or if she was still running from people who wanted to silence her permanently. The media attention that surrounded the case brought unexpected opportunities. A local news station interviewed Cole about his decision to come forward, and his story of a construction worker who had once been a paramedic resonated with viewers who understood the economic pressures that forced people to abandon their calling in favor of more practical work. Within a month, Cole received 3 job offers from medical services organizations that needed experienced personnel. The pay was better than construction work, the hours were more compatible with single parenting, and the work felt like a return to his true purpose. He accepted a position with the County Emergency Medical Service, working ambulance runs and training new paramedics. Jamie was proud of his father's return to medicine, though he was even prouder of the recognition Cole received for his role in exposing the police corruption. The mayor presented Cole with a citizenship award, and the local newspaper ran a feature story about ordinary people who chose to do extraordinary things when circumstances demanded it. But the most meaningful recognition came from unexpected sources. Letters arrived from citizens who had been victimized by the corrupt officers, thanking Cole for his courage in coming forward. A scholarship fund was established in his name for children of single parents who wanted to pursue careers in public service. 6 months after the trial ended, Cole was working a night shift when the ambulance was called to a domestic violence incident on the south side of town. The victim was a woman in her 30s, beaten severely enough to require hospitalization, and she was accompanied by a daughter who couldn't have been older than 8. As Cole treated the woman's injuries, he noticed something familiar in the child's eyes, the same kind of terror and confusion that he had seen in Riley's face that night at the accident scene. the look of someone who understood that the world was more dangerous and complicated than it should be, but who was still hoping that someone would help make it better. "Is my mom going to be okay?" the little girl asked, clutching a worn stuffed animal and trying to be brave in circumstances that would have frightened most adults. "She's going to be fine," Cole assured her, checking the woman's vital signs and preparing her for transport. "And you're safe now, too." The woman recovered from her injuries, and her estranged husband was arrested for assault. But Cole continued to think about the little girl, about the way she had looked at him with desperate hope, trusting that he would keep his promise about her mother's safety. A week later, Cole applied to become a volunteer with the county's victim advocacy program, working with families affected by domestic violence and other crimes. The training was extensive, and the work was emotionally demanding, but it felt like a natural extension of everything he had learned from his encounter with Riley Harper. Jamie, now 8 years old and more aware of his father's work, sometimes asked about the police officers who had been arrested and whether Cole ever worried about the people who might still be angry about his testimony. Cole explained that doing the right thing sometimes involved risk, but that avoiding risk usually meant allowing wrong things to continue. "Would you do it again?" Jamie asked one evening as they worked on homework together at the kitchen table, where Cole had once stared at unpaid bills and tried to figure out how to survive. "Which part?" "All of it. Helping that lady, getting the bad guys in trouble, changing our whole life." Cole looked at his son, at the apartment that now felt secure rather than desperate, at the future that seemed filled with possibilities rather than limitations. "Yes, buddy. I'd do it again. Even if it was dangerous, especially if it was dangerous. The things that matter most usually are." A year later, Cole received an unmarked envelope with no return address, postmarked from a city he had never visited. Inside was a photograph of a woman he didn't recognize, standing beside a young girl who looked happy and healthy. On the back, someone had written 2 words in handwriting he remembered. "Thank you." Cole showed the photograph to Jamie, explaining that sometimes helping people meant trusting that they would find their way to safety even when you couldn't follow their journey or know how their story ended. "Do you think she's really okay now?" Jamie asked, studying the faces in the photograph. "I think she's as okay as someone can be after going through what she went through, and I think she's probably helping other people the way we helped her." "That's good," Jamie said, with the matter-of-fact wisdom that children sometimes possess. "Everyone should help people when they can." Cole agreed, understanding that his son had learned the most important lesson not from speeches or lectures, but from watching his father choose courage over safety when the choice presented itself. It was a lesson that would serve Jamie well in whatever challenges his own future might hold. The corrupt officers served prison sentences ranging from 3 to 15 years, depending on the extent of their involvement and their cooperation with the investigation. The police department implemented new oversight procedures and transparency measures designed to prevent similar corruption in the future. Riley Harper was never found, either by law enforcement or by the people who had wanted to silence her. Her name appeared on no official records after the night of the accident, and her testimony was never needed to secure convictions. But her courage in gathering evidence and her willingness to risk everything to expose the truth had made the entire investigation possible. Cole often thought about the randomness of the encounter that had changed both of their lives. If he had taken a different route to the store, if he had decided not to get involved, if he had returned the evidence bag immediately without asking questions, the corruption would have continued and Riley would have remained a target. But he had made different choices, and those choices had rippled outward in ways that affected entire communities. Children were safer because corrupt officers were no longer in positions of authority. Families had closure because cases were reopened and investigated properly. Citizens had renewed faith in institutions because someone had proven that accountability was still possible. The construction job that Cole had left to return to emergency medicine was filled by another worker who needed steady employment to support his family. The cycle continued, people making whatever compromises were necessary to survive, while holding on to hope that circumstances might improve. On quiet nights, when Cole was working ambulance runs through the same neighborhoods where he had once struggled to make ends meet, he sometimes thought about the phone call he had received from Janet Morrison 6 months after the trial ended. The federal prosecutor had called to tell him that additional arrests were expected, that the investigation had expanded to include corruption in other departments and other cities. "You started something bigger than you realized," Morrison had said. "Sometimes one person's willingness to step forward gives others the courage to do the same." Cole understood that his role in the larger story had been relatively small, but that small actions could have outsized consequences when they occurred at critical moments. He had been in the right place at the right time, with the right combination of skills and principles to make a difference. The most lasting change, though, had been personal. Cole had rediscovered his sense of purpose and returned to work that felt meaningful rather than merely necessary. Jamie had learned that his father was someone who could be trusted to do difficult things when they mattered, and both of them had experienced the satisfaction that comes from contributing to something larger than their own immediate concerns. Years later, when Jamie was old enough to understand the full complexity of what had happened, he would ask his father about the decision to help Riley Harper and whether Cole had known how much their lives would change as a result. "I knew it would change things," Cole would answer, "but I didn't know how, and I didn't know if the changes would be good or bad. I just knew that she needed help, and I was capable of providing it. Weren't you scared?" "Terrified. But being scared doesn't excuse you from doing what's right. It just makes it more meaningful when you do it anyway." The story became part of family legend, told and retold as Jamie grew older and began making his own choices about how to respond when other people needed help. It was a reminder that ordinary people in ordinary circumstances sometimes found themselves called upon to do extraordinary things, and that the measure of character lay not in the absence of fear, but in action despite it. Cole Mitchell had saved a dying female cop on a rainy night, not knowing that she would change his future in ways he never could have imagined. But perhaps more importantly, he had discovered that changing someone else's future was often the most reliable way to transform your own.